Thank you so much, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Singapore. And on behalf of the Global Science Technology Forum, welcome to this particular conference. As was just indicated, I have the great pleasure of being the chair of the Board of Governors of GSTF, an organisation that I've been with from its inception some 6 or 7 years ago. And on behalf of our President and Chief Executive, Dr. Anton, may I welcome you to Singapore. Of course, if you're from Singapore, I don't have to welcome you, but those that have come from far and wide, welcome to this great city and welcome to our conference. What we seek to do in conferences of this nature is to provide an opportunity for people to hear from their colleagues, from their peers, from people around the world on the subjects that are of interest to you and in which you are conducting research. It may be through universities, it may be in private enterprise, but the point is that that opportunity for cutting-edge, up-to-date research work that each of you are engaged in, here is this opportunity by being together here in Singapore at a 2-day conference to hear from your peers and perhaps reflect on some of the information that they are imparting to you. The second thing I think is always good about our conferences is the fact that by virtue of you being here, and by virtue of you coming from around the world to be here, and by virtue of the fact you have an interest in these topics, there may be an opportunity, once you've heard somebody present, to say, look, that's very similar to work that I have an interest in doing. So you may be from Finland and you may be from Singapore, but there may be some interest in similar sorts of work. And so informally, around a cup of tea or at lunch, you might decide to discuss whether or not there is an opportunity for greater collaboration. And I have to say, in the 6 or 7 years that I've been coming to these conferences, what I'm seeing a lot more of is people genuinely using this as an opportunity to perhaps meet with people who they can then establish a working relationship, a collaborative relationship, and do some joint research. At the end of the day, we're about extending knowledge across the world. At the end of the day, we are about looking for solutions to problems. At the end of the day, we genuinely, and in your case, interested in environmental outcomes. Now, I too have an interest in this. And you will see that in the front part of our little brochure here, there's a document that I quickly threw together on the economics of climate change. I know from having a look at the papers that you are going to consider, your concerns about sustainable energy, how to improve the global environment. My organisation in Melbourne undertook some research last year on this very subject, but the way in which we came at it was from the perspective of the economics of climate change, an element which is often put to one side. When people talk about environmental issues or about climate change, it is simply about sea level rising, global warming, ice caps melting and so on. And that's critical, there's no doubt about that. But what's the missing element? The economic consequences of it. What does this mean for countries of the globe affected by climate change? And I would put to you a couple of things. I'll use Australia as an example. What we have seen in recent years has been that terrible Spaniard, El Nino, coming across the Pacific and bringing weather patterns that meant that we had prolonged periods of drought in Australia. Therefore, our agricultural industry suffered. Therefore, our beef farmers, our wheat farmers, and anybody else that was involved in agricultural pursuits meant that they couldn't grow a crop or grow their cattle and sell it for a profit, and that impacted on the Australian economy. We've had increasing numbers of highly and prolific, effective, destroying bushfires across Australia. In fact, as I'm talking to you now, bushfires are raging in southwest, Western Australia. What does that do? Again, it wipes out homes. It wipes out Australia's economic infrastructure. It wipes out crop production. So there is a massive economic effect, because what we're seeing with something like that is the devastation of bushfires raging across the Australian area. Same thing recently in what they call wildfires in California. And look what happens there. Houses are wiped out, road infrastructure, rail infrastructure, all subjected to a catastrophic effect of very violent and changing, more intensive and more frequent weather changing patterns. I use the example again of storms. I mean, I go back about 2 or 3 years ago in Australia. We had a massive cyclone hit northeast Queensland. We always get cyclones in Queensland, but nothing like this. And Cyclone Yassi came through the place and just completely wiped out a couple of whole towns. Closed down coal mines because everything was flooded. Destroyed the rail infrastructure. Destroyed the road infrastructure. Wiped out the sugarcane crops. You tell me that climate change is not having an effect on our economy in Australia. And what I'm referring to here is simply being replicated right around the globe. We are seeing, because of changed weather patterns, intensity, as I say, frequency of these sorts of things, massive economic consequences. 2 weeks ago, I got a daughter that lives in New York. 2 weeks ago, got the warning, massive big storm coming into New York. The government said they'd be proactive. They shut down the train system. They parked them all in the underground subways. They said they would fine people $300 if they were driving through the streets of New York. Well, the storm didn't come, but fair enough to the government for being a bit proactive, in the sense of being, it's better to be ready than safe than sorry. But the storm smashed into Boston and in northern parts of the United States, the northeast part of the US. This is happening time and time again. Flooding in Europe, in the UK. All of these things must be traced, can be traced, and all of people like you tell us can be traced to the fact that climate change is happening, and it is causing more intense and more frequent sorts of phenomena that is causing great economic disruption to economies. The other thing that sometimes gets written about is that there is a potential here for conflict. If you suddenly find that through climate change, areas where people can no longer survive require that they move out, there is a potential there for effects on immigration patterns, but perhaps in the worst case scenario, armed conflict. These are some of the things that we need to focus a little bit more attention on. And I commend all of you for what you're doing in looking at ways in which sustainable energy and improving our environment can lead to less greenhouse gases, looking at the global warming phenomena, how we can stop what appears to be, through massive industrial development, from impacting on the globe. Now, lest you think that I'm a rabid greenie, let me just tell you that I'm not. I'm about looking for that balance between sustainable economic development and sustainable environmental consequences. You've got to have a job to survive. We are a very smart people these days. The use of technology, we're only just scratching the surface as to what that's going to mean for us as a race now, a human race. What will it mean for us? And my concern is that sometimes we tend to sway one way or the other. If you're fully all for development, you're anti-green. If you're fully all for not doing anything, you're very pro-green. The answer is somewhere in the middle, to get that balance right. And through research that you folks are involved in, you can contribute to that knowledge to get that balance right. What I tried to say in my paper is that some of these environmental consequences, in fact, can be avoided in an economic sense. But it takes guts, it takes government policy. I hark back again to Australia. We had a government change in September, October 2013, on the back of one party coming in and saying that they would overturn the former government's attempt to try and do something about climate change by having a price on carbon, taxing the biggest polluters in Australia. That's what the government did. Government came in and said, well, we don't believe that. Basically, of course, a lot of them don't believe in the science of climate change. And they said, we've got a better plan. It's called direct action. They got elected, they junked the carbon tax, and instead now, I'm very pleased to say that our government allows me, through my taxes, to pay polluting industries not to do it anymore. Seems a bit back to front to me, but anyway, there you go. So, let me just conclude perhaps these remarks by saying, back to where I think I started. There are major economic consequences of climate change. There can be ways in which we can mitigate against the dreadful effects of that through the sorts of work, the research work that folks like you are doing, particularly around energy. We know, for example, at the moment, the energy circumstances of the globe are sort of up and down. Oil prices historically low at the moment. Having an economic consequence on the fact that in some parts of the world now companies have decided they're not going to invest in different energy sources. This is the case in Australia. Major decisions by corporations not to invest in major LNG opportunities. All of these things are critically important as you think about what the impact is going to be on what your research adds to improving our environment. And as a consequence, meaning that each and every country that you come from tackles this also with an economic imperative in mind. So if you think of nothing else about me when you go, it's this. There is always an economic consequence of climate change. And if we can mitigate against that, it means that we're making a real effort in that question around climate change and its consequential environmental and economic consequences. So again, thank you for being with us here in Singapore. Thank you for being part of the GSTF. You will note in that little document that's in your folder there, not only is there a copy of my great presentation, but there is also some information about joining GSTF. We are a membership organisation at the end of the day. We would love to think that people would take advantage of joining GSTF because we publish widely, we have a number of journals internationally recognised, we publish books and so on, and all of that's come about in the last 6 or 7 years. But I think the opportunity for you now to hear from your peers, from experts in the various fields associated with what matters to you, sustainable energy, environmental sciences, how there is an overlap and some of the broader consequences of that. This is now your time. So enjoy the conference. I look forward to perhaps chatting with a number of you over the next couple of days. I'll be around. I'll be around around the morning teas and lunches and so on. I'll try and sit in on a few of the presentations as well. And I'll certainly be back tomorrow afternoon when we make some concluding remarks and present some best paper awards. Enjoy your time together, make some new friends, think about collaboration, think about the economics of climate change and the economic consequences of the sorts of things that you have an interest in. And if you think there's a brave new world out there that you can make a contribution to improving, that's why you're here, and that's what it's all about. Thank you for being with us, and enjoy your conference. Thank you so much.